Now the isolation of the empty family home gave him the opportunity to act out those fantasies.
Early life.
But somewhere deep inside this innocent-looking toddler was the makings of a sadistic monster just waiting to come out.
Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His mother, Joyce, a teletype machine instructor, suffered depression and substance use issues. She often fought with her husband Lionel, whose college studies and work as a chemist kept him away from home. Because of their unraveling marriage, the couple neglected Jeff and his younger brother, David.
Are they gonna hit each other?
You're really gonna say that to me?
No, they just argued.
By 1968, the Dahmers lived in Bath Township, Ohio. Young Jeffrey may have already begun to develop an interest in bones and dead animals at this point, eventually leading to his having a collection of both. He stored them in a shed near the house, where he would dissect and preserve them in formaldehyde.
That's enough, Jeff.
Hey, Dad!
No, you are spending too much time in here.
While attending Revere High School, Jeffrey Dahmer was the odd one out, and he began drinking alcohol at school.
And I remember sitting next to him in a first period, I believe, history class, and he had a styrofoam cup of scotch, I believe it was scotch. I remember saying, "Jeff, what is that?" And he threw his head back and he shook it and he said, "It's my medicine."
He briefly played tennis and was in the school band, but by 1977, his grades had worsened. Regardless, Dahmer still graduated in May 1978. By then, his parents were in the middle of a messy divorce. His dad stayed at a motel, while his mother took David to go live with relatives, leaving Jeff alone at the house.
Jeffrey was 18, and like most teens his age, he had active sexual fantasies. But Jeffrey's deviated from the norm to include thoughts of killing his lover. Now the isolation of the empty family home gave him the opportunity to act out those fantasies.
First murder and military service. On June 18, 1978, just weeks after graduating, Jeffrey Dahmer picked up hitchhiker Stephen Mark Hicks. He enticed the man with beer and the two went back to his empty home.
He brought the guy home. They had access to alcohol. They were drinking. They got a little intoxicated. But when the guy wanted to leave, Jeff did not want him to leave. He wanted him to stay because he was lonely and also he was intoxicated.
When Hicks tried to leave a few hours later, Dahmer struck him with a dumbbell, knocking him unconscious and strangling him. Hicks's remains were buried in the backyard, later destroyed by Dahmer.
This is a really, really brutal crime, and he disposes of the body parts in the woods behind his house, and that's a really symbolic place for Jeffrey Dahmer.
In August, he enrolled at Ohio State University with the intention of majoring in business. However, Dahmer's issues with alcohol led to failing grades, and he dropped out after just 3 months. In January 1979, Lionel encouraged his son to enlist in the United States Army. He studied to be a medical specialist at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. And in July, he served as a combat medic in West Germany. But again, his substance use disorder affected his performance, and he was honorably discharged in March 1981.
His attempt to lead a normal life was not going according to plan.
Dahmer returned to live with his dad and stepmom in Ohio. But after being arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct, it was decided he would go live with his paternal grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, in an effort to get his life back on track.
In the struggle to control his fantasies, his behavior became more abnormal.
He took a mannequin from a department store, thinking that if he had that mannequin with him and sleeping in bed with the mannequin, etc., that maybe he could control the impulses that way.
West Allis. In January 1985, Dahmer started working late shifts at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory as a mixer. At this time, he also began frequenting the city's gay bars and bathhouses. But after slipping sleeping pills into his partner's drinks and getting physical with them while they were unconscious, he was banned from the bathhouses.
The sleeping pills give him the control and power over his sexual partners.
On November 20th, 1987, Dahmer took Stephen Walter Twomey to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee. While he allegedly only planned to drug him before performing non-consensual acts, Dahmer woke up to find Twomey deceased and badly beaten. He claimed to have no memory of the crime.
That's when the obsession went into full swing.
He decided after that second death
that he would no longer attempt to control his desires, that he would give full rein to them, yield entirely to them.
In January 1988, Dahmer lured James Edward Dockstader to his grandmother's house, offering him $50 to pose for explicit photos. He drugged and strangled him, and 2 months later, he did something similar to Richard Guerrero.
He stated in no way did he ever want to hurt anybody, as funny as this sounds. That is the reason why he killed everyone by strangling them, because not only did he get the power and the thrill of committing the murder, but it was also the most humane way.
Dahmer wouldn't kill again until March 1989, when he murdered Anthony Lee Sears. He was the last victim to be killed at the West Allis residence, and the first victim from whom Dahmer kept some remains. Apartment 213.
I was willing to take my chances in that neighborhood. It was generally quiet. There wasn't a lot of distraction or noise. A lot of privacy. It worked out nicely.
In May 1990, Jeffrey Dahmer moved into the Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street. That month, he would lure home Raymond Lamont Smith, otherwise known as Ricky Beeks, drugging him before strangling him. Dahmer continued this pattern with Edward Warren Smith in June, as well as Ernest Marquez Miller and David Courtney Thomas in September. In 1991, Dahmer began killing more frequently, beginning in February with teen Curtis Durrell Strotter, whom he'd met at a bus stop.
Curtis Strotter is a member of Gay Youth Milwaukee. He was rejected by his family for being gay, so he has to struggle to make ends meet. He's not getting any financial support from them. So when Dahmer offers him $50 to model, he immediately jumps on it.
On April 7th, Errol Lindsay became the first victim to undergo Dahmer's drilling technique. In his twisted mind, Dahmer believed he could put Lindsay and subsequent victims in a zombie-like state to keep them alive but incapacitated.
He wanted these people to stay with him. He didn't want them to leave, and he didn't really want them to die.
In May, Jeffrey Dahmer returned from the store to find his latest victim, Conorak Synthesomphone, had somehow escaped and was wandering around the street with some women.
He was holding on to me with a really, really strong grip, and he was trembling, he was shaking. So I just stayed with him, and I was like, I'm gonna get you some help.
Dahmer convinced the cops that had arrived that he was his boyfriend who'd gotten drunk and wandered out of their home. Unbelievably, police escorted Dahmer and Conorak back to the apartment and left. Had they looked inside the bedroom, they would have found the body of Tony Anthony Hughes, killed just 3 days prior. And running Dahmer's name would have shown that he was a registered sex offender on probation for assaulting Conorak's older brother in 1988. Dahmer was unaware the boys were related.
Dahmer had been slippery enough to keep his killings a secret. As soon as the cops left, he murdered the boy.
By late June, Dahmer started killing almost once a week. He met 2 men in Chicago, Matt Cleveland Turner on June 30th and Jeremiah Benjamin Weinberger on July 5th, persuading both to come with him to Milwaukee. 10 days later, bodybuilder Oliver Joseph Lacey met the same fate, as did his last victim, Joseph Arthur Bredehoft, 4 days after that.
Why were the police not connecting the murders? Dahmer's seeming normality helped him hide his reign of terror.
People like Dahmer can get away with this easier because law enforcement does not recognize him for what he is. They're looking for somebody who's dragging their knuckles on the pavement and baying at the moon with hair in their face.
Capture and confession. On July 22, 1991, Tracy Edwards escaped Dahmer's apartment after he'd been handcuffed on one wrist and threatened with a knife. Edwards caught the attention of police, who went up to apartment 213 to retrieve the key to the handcuffs.
Had the officer been able to unleash that handcuff, that may have been the end of it. So they went back to Dahmer's residence.
But what they found was a horrific crime scene with human remains, explicit photos of several victims, a 57-gallon drum, and much more. In custody, Dahmer readily confessed to 17 murders, including his first in Ohio. He admitted to investigators that he engaged in both criminal sexual acts and cannibalism. As a possible sign of remorse, he was instrumental in helping police identify all of his victims.
The word evil doesn't come up very often. It just doesn't. Guilty, not guilty. Did he do it, didn't he do it? Culpability, yes. But not often evil, because evil is almost a moral issue. That word came up with Dahmer.
Conviction and death.
I think the real fear that people had when they first saw Jeffrey Dahmer was that he looked like everybody else. He was a good-looking young man, and he is not the person that you would look at and say, stay away from that guy.
Jeffrey Dahmer, dubbed the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was officially charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder on July 25, 1991. This would become a total of 15 counts by his January 1992 trial. Dahmer was not charged with the murder of Twomey or with the attempted murder of Edwards. Dahmer pleaded guilty to all counts, and by February, experts had determined that he was legally sane when committing the murders.
At the time the crime was committed, did the defendant Jeffrey L. Dahmer have a mental disease? Answer, no.
Dahmer is declared sane in all 15 cases against him.
Though several medical professionals have diagnosed him with a slew of disorders, including borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a dependence on alcohol.
I know how much harm I have caused. I tried to do the best I could after the arrest to make amends, but no matter what I did, I could not undo the terrible harm I have caused. My attempt to help identify the remains was the best that I could do, and that was hardly anything.
In mid-February, Jeffrey Dahmer was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 15 life terms at Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin.
Dahmer received the maximum penalty for each and every count, but his story was far from finished.
In May, he was extradited to Ohio and received a 16th term of life imprisonment for the murder of Stephen Hicks.
Dahmer always said that he was compelled to kill, that they were urges. He said, I had urges that I could not control. He also said that even though he was in prison, he was relieved that the killing was done. He still had the urges. They didn't go away.
Dahmer was killed on November 28, 1994, by fellow inmate and convicted murderer Christopher Scarver, who attacked him and another inmate with a metal bar from the prison weight room.
Dahmer died on the way to the hospital. Among his last wishes, Dahmer had asked to be cremated. His ashes were split between his mother and father.
In the media, Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most talked about serial killers in history, and there are countless books, documentaries, and other various media covering his life and crimes. In 2002, Jeremy Renner gave a chilling performance as the titular murderer in Dahmer.
What's happening here?
What you want?
He's my friend, Comte.
This your friend?
He's just drunk.
Years later, former Disney star Ross Lynch played him as a teenager in My Friend Dahmer, based on the graphic novel of the same name, written by an old classmate of Dahmer's. Netflix has 2 major projects coming to the platform in fall 2022, starting on September 21st with Ryan Murphy's Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, starring Emmy winner Evan Peters. On October 7th, the docuseries Conversations with a Killer, which previously covered Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy, returns for a 3rd season with the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes.